Beneath a merciless sun and motionless air, the crimson dust settled like a shroud over everything. It wasn't weather for hurried movements, but Marcus Stone had never been one to rush regardless. He secured his chestnut mare beside the trading post, weathered leather groaning beneath his worn boots as he dismounted, automatically favoring his right leg from old wounds. The conflict had left its marks. He needed provisions, salt, rope, and perhaps whiskey if it wasn't watered down. Nothing else. Red Canyon hadn't evolved since springtime. One central street, a tilted bell tower, several hitching posts with gaunt horses and residents who observed everything while speaking little. Marcus appreciated this arrangement. He didn't offer smiles, and nobody expected them from him. When he entered the tavern, the stench of perspiration and spilled liquor clung like ancient guilt. 5 patrons played cards beside the heating stove. A woman sang discordantly near an abandoned piano, and one pair huddled in the corner weathered man, his wife, and 2 bowls of cooling broth. The husband appeared stocky and sun-damaged, calloused hands wrapped around a tin cup. His spouse bore the expression of someone who'd endured countless desert journeys. Their names would surface later, the Caldwells. People claimed they weren't locals, merely traveling through. But one carried something coveted by another, and that someone bore the name Jake Morrison. He already occupied the bar, slumped like an intoxicated patron, cards scattered before him, sneer beneath his copper-colored beard. Nobody detected the nervous tick in his left eye, but Marcus did. Nobody noticed his spurs remained silent, filed smooth for stealth. The gunfire erupted too suddenly for argument. By the time Marcus pivoted, both Caldwells had fallen. The husband collapsed across the table, blood pooling among scattered beans. The woman crumpled beside him like discarded fabric. Screaming commenced too late for intervention. Jake Morrison scattered his cards, shouted accusations of cheating, stumbled backward through the swinging doors with exaggerated clumsiness. The local lawman didn't stir from his corner seat, 3 drinks beyond functional. Marcus advanced slowly, not to interfere, but to observe. The floor was stained and slippery, but the boot print in the blood caught his attention. Deep heel, ridged outer edge, military issue, the same type he'd worn serving the Confederacy. Long before bullets had altered his destiny, he traced the print visually until it vanished into the street dust outside. By the time the sheriff struggled, he was upright and muttered about tavern disputes gone wrong. Marcus was already heading toward the stables behind the saloon. The smell of manure and sun-baked leather greeted him. Horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, one kicking at persistent flies. Then came an unexpected sound, a quick rustling like a startled rabbit in a snare. He paused, waited. A glint of light flickered through gaps in the board's eyes, wide and unblinking. He crouched slowly, displaying both hands. "I'm not here to harm you," he said quietly. The boy emerged from shadows, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, hair resembling a bird's nest, eyes wild. He gripped a blade no longer than his thumb, rusted at the tip, holding it with clear intent. Behind him, a much younger girl, maybe 4, was curled in straw, cheeks flushed, breathing rapidly. She clutched a tattered cloth doll like a lifeline. "You law?" the boy asked. "No," Marcus replied. "You witnessed it, saw enough. Will you tell?" "No." Silence settled. Dust drifted down. "You want money?" Marcus blinked once, then shook his head. "No, son. I want peace." The boy didn't lower the knife, but his arm began trembling. Marcus reached into his saddlebag, retrieved a water container and folded horse blanket, placing them just beyond reach. "I'll leave these here. You don't have to take them." He stood, turned, and departed. By twilight, Red Canyon had forgotten the Caldwells. The sheriff had labeled it a misunderstanding. The bodies were covered with canvas and left near the church storage shed. No preacher volunteered. Marcus returned to the stables. The blanket remained untouched, but the boy was still there. The girl was wheezing now, lips parched. She hadn't spoken a word. The boy's blade lay forgotten beside him. "You waiting for someone?" Marcus asked. The boy remained silent. "I have a wagon." It's heading toward quiet country. The boy looked up defiant, then frightened. Where? Where nobody knows your name. Where the wind speaks louder than men's voices. And if we refuse, then I leave you water again. But I won't return. He waited. Finally the boy whispered, Can she ride? She ride in back, under cover. The boy nodded. Marcus lifted the girl gently, surprised by her lightness. The boy followed. Carrying the water container like something sacred, the wagon creaked as it rolled down the dirt path from Red Canyon. Marcus didn't glance back, but the boy did. He sat in the wagon corner, arm around his sister, staring at the town until it disappeared behind the ridge. His eyes were dry but held too much knowledge for his years. Still, they didn't know each other's names. Yet something passed between them just before the sun dipped behind the hills, something silent, something solid. Not safety, but the beginning of it. The wagon rolled into the yard as the final sliver of sunlight vanished behind the Copper Mountains, casting lengthy, cold shadows across the dusty earth. Marcus dismounted first, slow and stiff. He reached for the bundle in the wagon bed, the girl's breath hot as forged coals. Sarah whimpered once in his arms. Thomas trailed behind, eyes darting like a trapped animal, his hand never straying far from the belt loop where the rusted blade still hung. The house stood square and weathered. Porch sagging, roof patched more with hope than proper materials. Light flickered behind the kitchen window. Alina saw them approaching. She opened the door and slammed it shut. Marcus stood on the porch a full minute before knocking. Once, twice no response. He didn't force entry. Instead, he carried the girl around the side to the barn, quiet, warm, and redolent of hay and horse sweat. He laid her on an old cot, with a grain sack for a mattress. Thomas sat in the corner, arms crossed, jaw tight. Marcus pulled the blanket up over Sarah's shoulders, brushing damp curls from her face. I'll get her water. Thomas didn't move. Inside the house, Alina leaned against the wall, chest heaving. Her hands shook not from anger, but memory. She'd scrubbed that floor twice today, hung linens in the sun, baked cornbread. She was supposed to be finished with this kind of ache. But there it was again, in Marcus's arms, fevered, fragile, familiar. She stared at the cedar chest in the corner, unopened for years. Inside, a folded quilt never used, a pair of knitted booties too small for any living foot, and a leather pouch of herbs she'd once carried in her apron like armor. She told herself she'd burned it all. She'd lied. Outside, the barn door creaked open again. Alina exhaled hard, then lit a lantern and crossed the room. The chest groaned as she opened it. In the barn, Thomas crouched beside Sarah, whispering words only she could understand. Her skin burned, her breath rasped. He heard the door open. Alina stepped in, face blank, sleeves rolled, a worn satchel in hand. She paused when she saw him. I won't let you hurt her, Thomas said. Voice thin but sharp. Alina didn't answer immediately. She knelt beside the cot, setting down a tin cup and folded cloth. Her fever's dangerous. If it doesn't break, she won't survive the night. You think I don't know that? I think you don't know I want her to live. Thomas's eyes narrowed. He looked down at the girl, then back to the woman with steady hands and shadowed gaze. What's in the pouch? Chamomile, elderflower, willow bark? Same things I used in the war. She wet the cloth, wrung it out, placed it on Sarah's forehead. Same things I used before. Thomas didn't ask what before meant. He didn't need to. Alina started humming a tune without words. Her hands moved carefully, checking pulse, brushing hair back. Sarah stirred, then barely whispered, Mama? The word split the barn in half. Alina froze. Her eyes brimmed before she could stop them. She turned her face away, breath caught in her throat like a fish hook. Thomas stood rigid as a fence post. He wanted to yell, to grab his sister and run, but he didn't move. Alina pressed a kiss to Sarah's damp temple. Then she rose and left the barn without a word. Later by the hearth, Marcus sat with his hands wrapped around a mug long since gone cold. Alina entered, face pale, arms limp at her sides. She called me Mama. Marcus looked up, quiet. I didn't ask for that. She didn't either. Silence settled like silt in the room. They need healing, Lena said, voice low. I can give them that, but I can't promise more. Marcus nodded. I'm not asking for more. That night, Thomas refused to sleep in the barn. He dragged an old wool blanket out behind the smokehouse and sat with his back to the wall, blade unsheathed beside him. Before closing his eyes, he drew a circle in the dirt around his sleeping spot, a ritual he'd performed since the day his father died. The circle didn't protect him, but it reminded him of control, of boundaries, of survival. He sat there long, watching shadows creep across the stars. Inside the house, Alina sat on the porch, knees drawn to her chest. In her hand was a strip of flannel, once white, now faded to bone gray. It had wrapped the baby she never named. It still smelled like rose oil and ash. She clutched it like a prayer. Then she whispered into the dark, could it be different this time? The night didn't answer. But it didn't say no either. The hill behind the stone homestead wasn't high, just a rise of sunburnt earth and scrub brush. But it felt taller when the wind descended from the copper peaks and whispered through the mesquite. At the summit stood a single wooden cross, gray with age, leaning slightly westward. As if it had grown tired of waiting for something, Thomas followed Marcus up there one morning. Not because he wanted to, but because Alina had handed him a biscuit and said, "He's fixing the south fence. Might be good for you to learn." Marcus didn't speak as they climbed. He never did unless the words mattered. Thomas didn't mind. Silence was easier to manage than promises. When they reached the crest, Marcus paused beside the cross. He didn't kneel, didn't touch it, just observed. Thomas stared at it too. "You bury someone?" he asked after a moment. Marcus didn't look at him. "Not someone," he said. "A chance." Thomas didn't ask more. He just followed when Marcus moved again. Down the hill into the valley, where the fence posts leaned like weary soldiers, by week's end, Thomas had learned to cinch a saddle, oil a bridle, and lift a rusted wire gate without startling the horses. He never asked to help, but he didn't walk away when Marcus handed him tools either. He liked the structure of it. Chores had beginnings and endings. Fix the post, tighten the hinge, feed the mare, check the trough. None of it asked him to trust, just to do. Trust had rules. Chores just had steps. Meanwhile, Sarah was changing too. Alina had moved her into the corner room by the kitchen, the one with the window overlooking the garden. Most days, Sarah sat on the floor with a stick of charcoal, scribbling quietly on the log wall. Alina didn't stop her. She encouraged it. One afternoon, Marcus walked past and stopped short. On the wood were 4 crude figures hand-drawn, too tall, too small. The biggest one wore a wide-brimmed hat. The smallest held a doll. The 2 in the middle were close together, hands nearly touching. Marcus stared longer than he meant to. "She calls it the family picture," Alina said behind him. Drying her hands on a flour-sack towel, he didn't reply, but he smiled. Just a little. One evening, while folding the children's laundry, what little they had, Thomas picked up Sarah's dress and noticed something odd about the necklace she always wore. It wasn't fancy, just a thin leather cord with a small brass charm shaped like a teardrop. But the back of the charm had stitching, fine, tight, almost hidden in the leather loop. Not a manufacturer's mark, a seam. A compartment. He turned it over in his hand. "Thomas." Sarah's voice came from the doorway. She looked at him with wide, blinking eyes. He dropped the necklace quickly back onto the pile. "Just folding," he said. She nodded once, then walked to him and slipped her hand into his without speaking. The necklace lay untouched for the rest of the evening. Later, as the sky burned orange and the coyotes began singing down by the wash, Alina sat with Sarah on the porch, her fingers weaving clumsy braids into the girl's hair. "Did I ever tell you how I learned about healing?" she asked. Sarah shook her head. "I was 16. My older brother broke his arm in a barn collapse. Mama couldn't afford a doctor, so she boiled linens and made me sit with him. Said if I could sew a hymn, I could stitch skin. Was it scary? It was worse than scary, but I did it anyway. Sarah leaned into her. Alina wrapped an arm around her. Healing isn't always about herbs and salves. Sometimes it's listening, or staying, or drawing on walls because no one's told you not to. They sat like that until the stars emerged. Thomas listened from the barn loft just above the tack wall. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He'd just come out for air. But the softness in Elena's voice made something knot up in his chest. Not because it was sad, because it didn't sound like pity. He'd heard pity before, from sheriffs, from doctors, from strangers who handed him crusts of bread and called him poor boy. This was different. This was steadier. That night, he didn't sharpen his knife before bed. He didn't check the corners for shadows. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't draw the circle around his blanket in the dirt. He lay back, hands behind his head, and stared at the rafters until the darkness took him. Not safe, but almost. Like maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to guard the door alone anymore. The wind came in hard that morning, straight off the copper peaks, whipping dust across the porch and rattling the windows like an omen. Marcus had seen enough weather to know when it carried more than dirt. There was tension in it, something brittle, unspoken. He was tightening a fence rail when he saw the rider alone figure trailing dust. Not in a hurry, but not wandering either. Intentional, calculated. The man dismounted near the hitching post, wiping his brow with a bandana that did little to hide the sharpness in his eyes. He wore a trail-worn coat, but the boots were too clean, the kind you polish when you want to look rough. The kind mercenaries wore. Fine land out here, the man said, tipping his hat. Dry, but honest. Marcus nodded once. It's land. Say fellow told me there's a stretch further south near the basin. Got a spring running straight through it. Odd, considering how dead the rest is. Marcus squinted at him. Ain't much down there but mesquite and broken cattle posts. The stranger smiled. Shame, water's a valuable thing. More valuable than gold, some say. Marcus gestured to the porch. You've ridden far enough to take a cup if you're asking. I don't offer much, but I do pour. They sat under the eaves, the stranger sipping coffee while Marcus pretended not to watch him too closely. But he noticed everything. The way the man cradled the mug with his left hand, his right never straying far from the holster. The faint limp in his gait, almost hidden, the faint accent beneath the drawl, and the faintest twitch when Marcus mentioned the war. Inside the house, Alina froze. She'd heard that voice before, just the tone, the pitch. Two words echoed in her memory like a church bell at a funeral. Get the girl. She'd been crouched behind the saloon that night in Red Canyon, dragging Sarah out from behind hay bales when she heard that same shout, raw and commanding above gunfire and chaos. Now here it was again, calmer, dressed in civility. But the venom hadn't changed. She set the coffee pot down, gripped the stove's edge until her knuckles went white. That night, the wind picked up again. Not soft this time, but sharp, carrying the scent of ash before the flames were even visible. It was Sarah who screamed first, pointing out the window with wide, terrified eyes. The barn, she whispered, it's glowing. Marcus was already moving. He grabbed the rifle from behind the door, tossing the spare to Alina. Stay with the children? Alina chambered around. Not a chance. They burst onto the porch as the fire roared skyward. Tongues of flame dancing from the hayloft, smoke curling into the stars. The horses screamed from their pens. Then gunfire. A shadow moved near the well. Alina dropped to one knee and fired. The man went down without a sound, face first into the dirt. Rifle clattering beside him, another figure came from the side, low and fast, heading for the house. Thomas met him halfway. The boy lunged with the leather reins Marcus had taught him to loop just days ago. He whipped them hard across the man's face, tangling them around the attacker's neck. The man stumbled, grabbed Thomas's coat, but Thomas dropped low and yanked. The man fell backward. A shot rang out. Marcus is clean, precise. The man didn't get up. Inside, Sarah was nowhere to be seen. Alina called for her, voice cracking. She tore through the kitchen, the bedrooms, the root cellar. Nothing. Marcus shouted from outside, "Check the smokehouse." Alina ran barefoot over stones and grit. She found Sarah curled beneath the smokehouse bench, hugging her knees. Whispering something into her doll's singed hair, Alina dropped to her knees and pulled the girl tight. "You're safe now. You're safe." But Alina didn't cry. Not yet. When dawn came, it came slow, muted through the haze of ash. The barn was gutted, reduced to black skeletons and embers. The yard was quiet, except for the crackle of dying flame and the slow creak of wind across scorched wood. 3 bodies lay wrapped in old canvas near the fence line. Marcus knelt beside one, the man who'd asked about the land. From the shredded shirt pocket, something had fallen out during the scuffle. A small, dirt-stained scrap of cloth. Marcus picked it up, turned it over. It was Cerise's piece of her coat, the one she always wore, now torn. The pocket ripped. Inside the lining was something stiff. He pulled it loose. A rolled piece of parchment, sealed with wax, smudged with time and heat. He opened it slowly. A map, crude, hand-drawn, marked with landmarks, canyons, dry creeks, and there at the center, circled in red ink, a spring tote. Thomas approached quietly, his face grim. "That was in her coat," Marcus said. Thomas nodded. "Pa drew it. Said it was for later. Said we had to keep it close." Marcus studied the boy's face, set like stone. But with cracks beginning to show, Thomas spoke again, voice low. "They didn't kill Pa for money." He looked at the map, then the bodies, then the burned barn. They killed him for that. That evening, Marcus dug graves behind the hill near the cross. Not out of kindness, out of finality. Thomas helped, silent but present. Alina kept Sarah inside, rocking her slow as the night settled. When the dirt was packed tight and the markers in place, Marcus stood back, wiping sweat and ash from his brow. He looked at the earth, then at Thomas. "We bury them," he said. "Not just to forget." He stared down, voice flat and sure. "But to say they won't rise again." The dust rolled in with a stranger. He rode a black gelding, wore a charcoal vest and polished boots too fine for Red Canyon. He dismounted like a man who expected people to watch him. They did. The general store owner stopped sweeping. 2 men on the saloon porch set down their cards. And old Miss Tilly, who hadn't stood in 5 years, shifted at her window for a better view. He walked straight to the church. Red Canyon's courthouse in all but name and tacked a sheet of paper to the weather-worn door with 4 precise hammer strokes by sundown. Word had spread like wildfire on dry wind. "Federal agents here. Says the land's under dispute. Says them children ain't got no kin." The next morning, half the town packed the church pews. The smell of pine tar and worry hung in the air. Marcus stood at the front, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Alina beside him, spine straight. Thomas sat 2 pews back with Sarah on his lap, her doll clutched tight. Both silent, the stranger stood before the congregation like a preacher of law and consequence. "Name's Blackwood," he began, voice as slick as boot oil. "Sent on behalf of the Territorial Claims Bureau, acting in accordance with federal statutes." He laid out a bundle of papers to clean. Too convenient. This land, Section 12, Quarter 3, was never properly transferred. Its previous owner, one Caldwell, died intestate. His children, minors, have no legal guardian under law. The property reverts to the Bureau until a formal claim is established by blood or appointed custody. A murmur spread like brush fire. Sheriff Dulles scratched his jaw, eyes flicking between Blackwood and Marcus. "You saying them children ain't got no right to that land?" Blackwood smiled without showing teeth. "Not without a legal custodian. Proof of title," or he gestured to Alina, who had stepped forward. "That map was drawn by their father. No signature. No seal, no legal standing." Blackwood tapped the page. "I don't make the rules, ma'am. I enforce them." A voice rose from the back. "You enforce awful quiet. Considering you rode in under no flag but your own. Another voice sharper. What's your tie to Jake Morrison? Blackwood didn't flinch. My concern is property, not gossip. That's when Thomas stood up.